Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 2nd of December 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Ryan Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin here with me in the studio. Welcome, Ben. And also we are being joined by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie. That's live link, of course, from north of the border in Scotland. I'm looking at the backdrop and thinking, it wasn't quite like that a few minutes ago because it was very dark and pouring with rain, but maybe sun is shining on UK Column today. Now, we're in a very interesting situation in the country, in the world. Death and destruction, chaos and breakdown. It is everywhere. And of course, the horrific wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, UK government pumping in weapons to keep that battle going until we can get hold of the 27 trillion in resources, mineral reserves, etc. in Ukraine. But a key thing for our audience, and one that we'd like to push, is what exactly is the UK government? The same argument could be, or the same question could be asked to the US government, but focusing on who says they're part of the government and what they say is a key part of understanding what's going on around us, and that's a key part of doing something about it. So let's start off with a video clip of David Lammy, and he was in a Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office committee meeting where he was asked certain questions. Let's listen to what he said.
I am in the end, my ancestors were slaves. And I don't run away from that fact. That is a fact. It was a terrible time. I'm very proud to have been part of a government under Tony Blair, where we commemorated the abolition of the slave trade, the tremendous work done by people like Wilberforce and the city of Hull, the work in places like Liverpool and Bristol, the campaigns, ordinary people across this country fighting to end that terrible, terrible moment. But at this point in time, we now look forward, we look to the future, we look to hope and possibility with those countries. There's much that we can do together. Climate finance is the centre of that. I was very pleased to be with Mia Mottley just a few days ago on a platform, a COP on these issues. It's the future, I think, that we should keep in mind, not payments of the kind that I saw in the papers, but were not raised with me by any leader that I met, and I'm afraid the British government are very clear on we cannot do.
So to our viewers and listeners today, did you get it? What was he talking about? You might have thought it was slavery, but actually towards the end of the clip, no, what's he talking? He's talking about COP and climate change. And that's because the climate change agenda is the driving agenda for every single thing that's happening. So slavery, we might say to David Lammy, for goodness sake, get over it, man. But what's the real undertone? It's the climate. Let's listen to him talking in this second clip.
We've been leading a review into the soft power impact on BBC World Service, and I've asked every person who's attended this same question, including Sir Philip Barton. So we've discussed recently about the closure of BBC Arabia Radio. This same frequency has now been taken over by Russia Today. And we've had examples where BBC broadcast and previous channels that they've broadcast on, the frequencies have been bought either by Russia Today, by Sputnik or Chinese state radio media. Experts have called it a disaster for the region, with no fair or impartial news being made available. They've said it was a trusted source and there's no longer any impartial news. Do you think that future assessments of funding for the World Service should consider the impact on international and national security and the impact on disinformation in our world?
Yes, I do. Look, I think let's be absolutely crystal clear about this. In the tough geopolitical environment that I outlined, I am worried about the emerging axis between countries like Russia, Iran and the DPRK. rightly in this committee, no doubt, will be very focused on the hard power and some of the challenges we have with war and conflict particularly. And that will dominate much of your time, I suspect, over the course of this Parliament. But if we think back to the Cold War period, it was also the case that we had to win the battle of hearts and minds. And we all know in the end, you don't get change solely through hard power. Soft power is important. And if it is the case that the British language or the work of the BBC World Service is receding and other countries are stepping in, then I'm afraid I don't think we're living up to generations of the past. So I was pleased to be able to secure the extra funding or the uplift of 32.6 million in the last spending review to ensure that we weren't in a position where the BBC World Service was having to close language services. And I'm grateful to the representations that the BBC made, and I'm grateful to the Treasury for understanding that case. But I do believe the basis of your question is entirely right.
So, my goodness, he's telling us so much there. Basically, the UK hard and soft power base is beginning to fall apart. The BBC World Service not able to spread its propaganda, so we've got to get more money in. No money for heating and for elderly people in UK, but get the money into the propaganda for the BBC so that we can exert hard and soft power propaganda to control as much of the world as possible. You can't make this stuff up. You don't have to, because he's telling you. Let's just bring Juliet Harkin on screen, because the UK column, unique in calling out BBC Media Action, the BBC's charity that was boasting that in 2004 it was working inside Syria to help people who were essentially fomenting war. The BBC called them change agents, but what they were really doing was fomenting war in Syria. And look at the bloodshed that's erupted now. How can we understand what's really happening? Well, I didn't think in 2024 I'd be thanking Dominic Cummings for telling us something about how the system works. Let's listen to what he said. Incredible.
The person in the, so if you think of two roles, right? The Foreign Secretary in Great Britain and the private secretary in the PM's office responsible for foreign affairs, an official whose name has never been in the newspapers. That person was like 10 times more powerful and important than the Secretary of State was. And I think this is something which people just don't really realize. And it's part of like how the whole system has become fake. So you have fake meritocracy, fake responsibility, and then fake cabinet government. So they all walk up Downing Street, the cameras whir, they pose, they smile, ha ha, I'm going into the most powerful meeting, aren't I great? But it's all nonsense. The cabinet is just a kind of stage theatre. And actually officials in the cabinet office have already decided it all. When you sit in Whitehall now, right, in meetings, they are literally scripted. So when the Prime Minister has a meeting with ministers, what happens is that before the Prime Minister has that meeting, officials go into the Prime Minister's study and they give him a folder. And in the folder at the front is a thing called Chairman's Notes. And that's the script. And that's what the Prime Minister reads out. And the conclusions for the meeting are in the Chairman's Notes, drafted before the meeting happens, right? So the Prime Minister says, hello, Secretary of State, blah, blah, blah. And then all these officials sit around the sides on chairs around the edge of the room. And then the MP, the Secretaries of State, all look down at their folders because they've all got their scripts, right? And this is why I use the NPC meme, right? Because then the Prime Minister reads out, well, we're here to discuss blah, blah, blah. And then he goes around the room, and then Secretary of State for Justice or the Foreign Secretary reads out his bullet points, and then he reads out their bullet points, and they read out. If anyone goes on script, you see the officials sort of go, and then look over at the other official on the side of the room and kind of go. That means we'll come back to that after the meeting and make sure that that doesn't happen. And then at the end, it was a fascinating, great discussion. Thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful, original contributions. And then he reads out the conclusions, which are all drafted in advance. And it sounds like a parody, but it is literally how the British state functions. And the MPs are happy with that, right? Well, how does the psychology of it work? The officials are happy because they have almost all the real power. The cabinet secretary is now 100 times more powerful than any cabinet minister apart from the PM. And the MPs are happy because this whole system pretends that they're in charge. So both sides are basically happy with the fake version of the government.
Well, there we are. That was very clear and concise. We may not agree with him on many other subjects, but was he exposing how the real system works? It's a fake system. The MPs have got no clue as to what's going on. They just do as they are told, and others control things. Now, before I move on, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Ben, the BBC, for putting that clip up, because that's where I discovered it. So thank you to them. And then I'm just going to also say, pay attention to this sort of thing, because this is what Cummings is really talking about, the power of others in government. UK and the World Economic Forum to lead regulation revolution to foster industries of the future. So basically in January 2019, here we had the World Economic Forum. Who the hell are they being brought in order to work with the government to oversee regulation? That means control of industries in the future. And if we want to see other people in action who we're not even sure what they are they politicians or are they enablers or are they tools of the World Economic Forum? Let's just watch 20 seconds of Boris Johnson in action.
Well, Boris Johnson, you are one of the most requested guests for Ukraine the Latest and here at the Telegraph, so it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your fabled podcast at last.
Well, thank you. And I think it probably makes sense to begin with Donald Trump and his election. You were one of the earliest backers of Trump. We've seen some of his appointments made in the...
Well, we'll save you that, but what does that man look like? At least the Telegraph interviewer is reasonably presented. Boris Johnson, how can we describe him? A slob, I think, would be the word from the 1970s at least. Utter disgrace. What did he want? More weapons, more war in Ukraine in order that we, his regime, can grab those resources. And let's end with Joe Biden, who from the other side of the Atlantic really sets the scene because, of course, he's saying, I'm going to use my power to ensure that nobody is above the law. Or not.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
So that's why he's pardoning his son, of course, because nobody is above the law. We've got to move on from there, but a snapshot of the fact that if you believe you live in a democracy in UK and the United States in 2024, sadly mistaken, we have to get the lid off the people who are in control. And I think, Ben, you're going to start to take us into that murky pond.
More fake things. Thank you, Brian. So we've got a fake government, fake justice system. What else do we need? We need a fake youth movement to vote the fake politicians into power. Let's find out about My Life, My Say.
My Life, My Say is all about trying to encourage young people to participate in democracy and politics. There are more than 9 million people currently in this country who aren't registered to vote, and a significant proportion of that is young people. We're trying to really empower and give you the skills to essentially be leaders in your communities.
I know what it feels like to be passionate about issues and not always have your voice heard. We want every young person in the UK to have an opportunity to influence the decisions that affect them. For us, it's not just about the opportunity to vote and to participate in elections. It's about the wider issues that young people really care about. It's absolutely fantastic to have an organisation like the Body Shop support. 71% of young people felt that political parties and candidates didn't speak directly to young people in the lead up to elections. 76% believe the voting age and the eligibility around that should be the same across all UK elections. Half of young people in the UK believe that actually there weren't enough opportunities to learn about politics. Young people really need to be involved.
My Life, My Say, an organic grassroots youth movement sponsored by the Body Shop. And not just the Body Shop, a whole cornucopia of international corporations, but more interestingly, a bunch of political groups as well. We've got Chatham House in there, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. The City of London got involved this year, actually. They were backing My Life, My Say's Next Gen event, which took place on the 22nd of November, which we're going to talk about this afternoon. Who else is in the mix? The National Lottery Community Fund, the Duke of Edinburgh Award, of course, the Royal Family are in there, and also the US State Department, which for my money actually means that My Life, My Say amounts to election interference on behalf of the US government. So this is a whole bunch of corporate and philanthropic money trying to deliver a set of very specific outcomes desired by the establishment. And we've talked about them a lot over the past 12 months. They're an extremely important and influential movement in the UK politics. That goes without saying, to be honest with you, if you look at the number of people circulating around them. We're going to take you through the Next Gen event, which happened, as I said, on the 22nd of November. It's hosted by this guy, Jermaine Jackman, who is a singer, songwriter and activist. Right, so we're going to see lots of this today. TV personality and activist, social media influencer and activist. They're all activists. And he opened up by saying, "Welcome to Next Gen 24. I'm old enough to remember it being called Common Futures Forum." I'm also old enough to remember that, Jermaine. And you've changed the name, but I just wanted to get that in up front. That word common agenda, that's UN language, common purpose. Yeah, this is what we're looking at here, I think. What else does he go on to say in his opening remarks? "I like causing trouble. In order to create change, you have to cause trouble. You need to be a radical." And you can see on his jumper there, we don't do ordinary. We're different. We're the young generation. We come here to shake things up. And this runs through absolutely everything. So who are the key troublemakers? We've got these two, Militia John and Dan Laws. They are co-CEO. And I'm starting to see this a lot, actually. I don't think this is a good thing. Co-chief, co-chair. I think you can only have one chief, so one chair.
It blurs the lines, the proper lines is blurred.
Yeah, exactly. It removes accountability, I think. You know, it's really, really important. But actually, Dan Laws stepped to the forefront and basically revealed that Militia is the most amazing right hand. So actually, I think it's this guy who's in charge, right? He's the main guy, and she's up there to help distort the picture and maybe give a little bit of optical support, you know, like she looks like, you know, she kind of fits the DEI mold, let's put it like that. And that's certainly important to an organisation like MLMS, because that's very much the agenda that they're promoting. So who is this guy, Dan Laws? He's very young, he's 23. He's been politically active since he was 15. He's been involved with organisations like Nesta, the Bank of England, the United Nations, the House of Commons, BAFTA, the British Chambers of Commerce. Extremely well connected. He did a master's program, the Schwarzman Scholarship, which was about exporting Chinese ideas to the world. Really importantly, that's backed by Stephen Schwarzman, the chair and founder of Blackstone, one of the world's biggest investment funds. Dan Laws also very closely linked into Tortoise Media. I reported this back in October, I believe it was. So this is an event at the London Stock Exchange focusing on improving youth employment. This was co-convened by Tortoise Media, London Stock Exchange Group, and Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. You've got James Harding there on the left, editor of Tortoise Media, Dan Laws on the right, sitting around the boardroom table with some extraordinarily powerful people, right? So this guy is right in the mix, even up to the level of being a recipient of the Diana Award, and also sits on the board of the Diana Award. And we can see him here pictured with Prince William. This comes from his Twitter profile. So this is a very, very well-connected young man who's been progressed extremely quickly through the system. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about him as time goes along. Now, they were getting together at the Barbican. They had a lot to celebrate. So they ran a big campaign through the summer, this Give an X campaign, which we've spoken about, where they signed up nearly 500,000 young people to vote, which would have had a material impact on the UK election, right? So most of those young people voted for Labour, who got just under 10 million votes. So about 5% of the vote, potentially, could be attributed to MLMS for Labour. I mean, that's quite significant and really went to validate that Labour victory. Who else was there on the day? So I'm just going to whip through some of this. I'm not going to show any clips because most of the content was so predictable that it doesn't really bear repeating, to be honest with you, but I'll just show you some of the people involved. So we had Tinder sponsoring a session on authenticity because people are always their most authentic on dating apps, apparently. Really odd alignment there, I thought. We had Ian Dale from LBC. And actually, this was a formal partnership with Global Radio via the Global Academy. So this is a new partnership between My Life, My Say and one of the biggest media organisations in the UK. We had Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream brand, there for the refugee vote. No idea really what the alignment there is, what the strategy there is for the brand, but they seem to be in the mix a lot, Ben & Jerry's, on these kinds of issues. Amber Rudd, former Home Secretary and currently an advisor to Darktrace, the UK technology company that was founded by Mike Lynch. Very, very odd and slightly sinister technology business, being interviewed by Sharon Gafka from Love Island. This is the kind of tone of debate that the politicians, I'm sure, love, right? I mean, this is just softball questions all day long, really easy to deal with. We had some influencer types. Ayame, not really sure what she's about, but she's got 5 million followers, quite impressive. Clover Hogan, who I spoke about last week, who's a climate alarmist. She's basically angling to be the next Greta Thunberg, as far as I can tell. A few politicians, Derek Walker, so the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, talking about how dogs are racist. Well, he actually didn't say that, but he could have done, because that is one of their policies that we've heard about over the past few weeks coming out of Wales. And then Mete Koban, who presented the video that we opened up with, he was the founder of My Life, My Say. He turned out to give his blessings to proceedings, but he's now moved on to the position of Deputy Mayor of London for Environment and Energy. So he's pushing the climate change agenda in the capital city here in the UK. And he is also a Obama Foundation leader for Europe 2024 to 25. So he's been elevated up into the global system. He was in Hackney before and he's been bumped up into the top levels. Well done, Mete Koban. Good for you. Who else do we have there? Al Campbell, bad Al Campbell, who's now, I don't know, sort of a political commentator. What did he get asked about by this young lady on the right-hand side, Janelle Awamoyi from the BBC, who's about, I don't know, she can't be more than 24, 25 years old. And again, it's this sort of dynamic where you've got a man who is an absolute brute, like he's done some extraordinarily bad things in his career, being thrown softball questions by a 25-year-old, right? So the questions he were being posed were about mental health in the workplace and how awful Donald Trump is, and ironically, the importance of holding politicians to account. Right? That's one of the questions that was thrown to him, right? So nothing about WMDs in Iraq, nothing about Operation Ore, nothing about the death of David Kelly, right? So this is exactly the kind of audience that these people like to talk to. And actually, this is an age-limited event. So if you're over 30, you can't go, yeah? So this is very, very targeted on Gen Z, very specifically focused on that. And Campbell's been involved for a long time. So actually, Koban, this was over the summer, he revealed that Campbell basically helped set up the charity 11 years ago and has opened many doors that have enabled so many opportunities for young people, especially for Mete Koban, MBE and Obama leader, right? He's done very well out of this relationship. A little bit of data coming up. They had some a guy from a research firm called Opinium talking about what's going on with the youth. So they spoke to 1,000 youths across the country to find out their thoughts on things. Apparently young people, they really care about politics, but they don't think politics cares about them. I'd beg to differ, actually. I mean, look at the entire scenario that you're currently surrounded with MLMS and Chatham House and all of these people. Politics really cares about you. I think the issue is that you're not being given enough free stuff, right? And that's probably what's going on here. They are worried that they can't buy a home, but they're not worried about mass immigration. Someone should probably tell them that those things are two sides of the same coin. And no one trusts the Tories, which is absolutely no surprise. at all. There was a serving minister on stage. So Dan Laws came back out and spoke to this lady, Abina Opong Azari. I hope I'm saying that correctly. She's the MP for Erith and Thamesmead in South East London. She came out to say that I was involved in the Fabian Women's Network for 4 years, just making sure we had people from diverse backgrounds, making sure it wasn't predominantly white middle-class individuals. It felt like we had to change. And MLMS is linked to the Fabian Society. They actually had a panel session at the Fabian Society event at the Labour conference back in October. So there's a very clear link there to the Fabians. We've been talking about them a lot over the past 12 months, and I'm sure before that as well. Another quote from Miss Azari. So by the time I left the Labour Women's Network, over 50% of the exec were from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Right, which is really the issue with a lot of this DEI stuff. You're now overrepresented, because the nation itself is still 80% white European. If we have to use these terms, I will use them. 80% white European. Not that you know it from what you've done at the Labour Women's Network or from the kind of representation that we're seeing on stage at MLMS, right? Now, importantly, this woman, as well as being the MP for Erith and Thamesmead, is also Parliamentary Secretary for the Cabinet Office. And we spoke about the Cabinet Office last week because that's where Catherine Day works. Catherine Day, the Deputy Director of the Cabinet Office, responsible for foresight, who was handed over the contract for defining the future vision for the country to a political foundation, right? So this lady at MLMS is working with Catherine Day, and she's also working, and in fact she's job sharing with Georgia Gould, former Mayor of Camden, who is currently the MP for Maida Vale and another bit of London that I can't remember off the top of my head. And they are doing a co-share. Look, it's a co-job. They're both doing it at the same time. This has never happened before. Right, so we had Dan Laws and his partner co-leading MLMS, and you've got Abina Opong Azari and Georgia Gould co-sharing the job of being Parliamentary Secretary at the Cabinet Office, which is an extraordinarily important and central function in government. It oversees almost everything, including digitisation of governance, right, which we'll come on to a little bit later. Georgia Gould is also very close to Alistair Campbell. He played the bagpipes at her wedding. I'm not sure this is her wedding. She probably didn't have a chip van at her wedding, but she probably did have a Stop Brexit banner. So I don't know, maybe it could be. I'm not sure. Anyway, just going to sign off with a couple of final observations. So this came from someone who attended the event on LinkedIn, said, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu, right? And there were 0 Anglo-Saxon males on any of the panels at any point during the day, apart from the politicians. So the next generation that My Life My Say is putting forward has got nothing to do with the native population of the country. So apparently we're on the menu, according to this young lady who shared this. And then the final thing was a comment from someone, one of the young men on one of the panels earlier on in the day, who was talking about the need to be louder, to be the loud generation, to constantly demand things from everybody around you. He said, I've invented a phrase that you should use. Who's going to create the change you wish to see if it's not you? Right? And actually, we've already got a phrase that does that. Be the change you wish to see in the world. We've already got that, and it does the same job, but better and in a more elegant way. But you wouldn't know that because, like a lot of young people, you think everything starts with you.
Ben, thank you very, very much for that. A lot of detail there for our audience. We know that, but you can obviously go back and watch this again, have a look at the show notes. These are the people controlling government and our society. And of course, Dominic Cummings earlier on said quite happily that the MPs actually haven't got a clue what's going on. And that statement is true, even if they're involved in the sort of organisations and initiatives that Ben is talking about. Diane, welcome to the news. And I'm going to say you're on the same subject, really, but coming in from a different angle, the attack on language.
Yes, thanks, Brian. And hello, Ben. Happy to be here this afternoon. Yes, I'm going to do some coverage today on the attack on language and education and culture and all of the things that are under attack in our country and throughout the West. I would like to say, first of all, that we've been hearing, which seems to define our time at the moment. What is a woman? I said on Twitter this morning, on my Twitter, Diane UKC, that I would be here today as an example of a woman. I am not a cis woman. You are not cis men, hopefully, Ben and Brian. And let's hear from Amala Akpanobi about the word cis and what that means to her as a woman.
I am not a cis woman. I am simply a woman. I reject the phrase cisgender. It was created out of thin air as a means to deviate us from trans people who are taking on this caricature of being a woman, taking on her, she pronouns, and taking on rights to womanhood that they do not deserve. For so long, the feminist movement has been saying women have been victimized and oppressed by men. But if the man wears a wig and puts on makeup, suddenly they're oppressed? Is that what happens? Do they take on all the oppression that women have been facing for decades in this country now that they simply identify as one? And is that as far as you have to go? Just saying I am a woman in order to be one? I guess so, because that's what a lot of people are doing now. They're just saying, well, I'm a woman.
So this came about because of, well, a lot of things, obviously, we'll talk about in just a minute. But this tweet from James Esses, who is my colleague in Academics for Academic Freedom, tweeted a few days ago, "We are not cis male or cis female. We are simply male or female, no prefix required." So that tweet got picked up and retweeted by Elon Musk, and it now has about 100 million views just over the past few days, which is incredible. I think it starts to show that people are getting tired of the whole thing. So we look at this article here from over the weekend as well, the last few days, with this consideration of what a woman is. And if you want more detail on this case, you can go back to Charles Mallett's report from last week. But there's just been some updates I wanted to share first. Britons had been wondering what those 34 million people who are not men might be. So this is obviously a question that got raised by the Scottish government in laws that they passed in 2022 regarding gender identification and what that means in Scotland. So it got all the way up to the Supreme Court down in London. Hannah Barnes, who's a brilliant writer on this topic and many other topics, wrote that the Scottish government is in fact ignoring women's rights. And to see that position of gender recognition and what that means and how it is changing the language around the term woman, that alone. Joe Phoenix as well, another one of my colleagues, talking about she was actually present at the hearing. And she tweeted, "Never did I think that I would sit in the Supreme Court and hear the sentence, 'Natal men do not get pregnant.'" Like, we had to hear that, right? So we've got some really good coverage here from around the women from Sex Matters and For Women Scotland, who have done some really great work around what this means for being, what is a woman, what does it mean? And so we see very positive coverage here from their photograph compared to the really negative coverage that we see in, for example, BBC, where they're showing very angry trans lobbyists coming in and kind of making a big disaster out of the whole situation, making it really a whole lot worse. So I've got some other examples here of not about women and men necessarily, but around other issues of education and language to kind of show what's been going on here. Has wokeness killed the English literature degree? That's a question from the Telegraph. These are all mainstream sources, but just to show that it's out there to the public, saying that some academics are too scared to teach Joseph Conrad and parts of the Canterbury Tales to students because of a fear of causing offense. Now, I remember reading the Canterbury Tales in high school and loved it. I can't imagine why it would be offensive to people, but that's just me. At the University of Liverpool, lecturers have been plunged into a row of perceived wokeness after being told to start problematizing whiteness and heterosexuality during seminars. One critic said the concept of decolonization has now morphed into an aggressive and illiberal political ideology. And what do we mean by decolonization? Well, please remember that my definition of this is the destruction of Western culture and history and Western civilization, because that's what they're trying to do. It's just a fancy term for it. The QAA has been told academics to decolonize classics and maths. And how do we do this? Well, we include equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice into classics and maths. I really didn't know that maths could be decolonized, but apparently it can be, because some of the topics were created by old white men, unfortunately, apparently. And so we see here what we have to do is include cultural contexts, include what issues might now be considered problematic. So this is throughout all topics of study in universities in the UK at this point, especially from the QAA membership. This is not just in universities, it's in libraries, it's in schools. Labour says that they are basically going to change history so that British children or children going to school in Britain will no longer learn about the actual past of Britain because it is offensive and racist. And the person that they have now put in charge, that Bridget Phillipson put into place, Professor Becky Francis, who is the head of the Education Endowment Foundation. And there has been a process to get feedback on what people think should be included in the curriculum. And unfortunately, I didn't even hear about it until the consultation was already closed on the 22nd of November. But Professor Becky Francis, her expertise focuses on social identities. So where have you heard that before? Identity politics, gender, race, social class, and educational contexts. And so, of course, we can imagine that that's going to be the focus going forward. The University of Manchester Library, which I've covered previously, they have quite an extensive decolonization practice going on at the moment, saying that they believe decolonized libraries offer a more accurate and less biased account of history and experiences. It rejects colonial ways of thinking and power structures that privilege white and Eurocentric perspectives and narratives. So, of course, this means, for example, changing the word costume to traditional dress in their library catalog, because costume is now an offensive term. So going out of education and sort of into other areas in public, here's one from Mike Robinson. RTE said last year, reported on this, that there was a book that was pulled from the depiction of an Irish family. The publisher was called the Educational Company of Ireland, and it removed something because there was a section entitled All Different, All Equal, with an Aaron jumper wearing Irish family, eating bacon, cabbage, and potatoes every day, and not liking change or difference. And so they removed this because this was found to be offensive to certain people. In Wales, of course, we have a lot of problems going on in Wales with the anti-racism laws that are in place. The government has said that we are going to change the beliefs and behavior of the white majority in order to build an inclusive society for all our Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people. So what does this do to Wales in particular? Well, it does quite a bit because everything is an attack on white people in Wales, basically from libraries to schools to taking your dog to the park to everything else. And it seems to be specifically defined as white people holding negative views of other people. And that's the definition of racism. It's not about any other race who could potentially be racist against anyone. It's just the white people. Statues of white men may need to be destroyed, according to the Welsh government, because these people could be perceived as aggressors out to expand the British Empire, regardless of what actually happened in history. It's offensive, so we're going to change it. And so I decided to look at the Office of National Statistics to see the kind of what is the population makeup of Wales. And we can see, except for in the cities down to the south near Cardiff and Newport, it is essentially 98.5% white. So we are, again, just like with the trans lobby, concerned with a very, very small portion of the population and offending them. Just for a bit of humor in the middle of all this, the Telegraph reported on a report in 2021 that dirty pants on a washing line was recorded as a non-crime hate incident by police. And that was because someone had an Italian surname, and it was first put on the washing line in July that year when they defeated England on penalties after a 1-1 draw in the final of football's European Championships. So it's amazing what can be considered to be offensive nowadays. Just don't hang out your dirty pants. To go back on something that's been covered previously on UK Column, I believe it was last year, the strategy of the mind, Maoism, and culture war in the West. This is a really important article that I encourage everyone to take a look at. And it basically says, in nonviolent form, culture war continues in the need to decolonize alleged structures of oppression from the secondary and tertiary curriculums of schools and universities to libraries, health services, the police, the armed forces, and to just about everything. And for further reading, these same authors have written a book that was published in 2022 called The Strategy of Maoism in the West, Rage in the Radical Left. And I've read the first couple of chapters of it so far. And what it says it explores is the channels of ideological influence by which basically the Maoist long march through the institutions is taking place, and how it is currently manifested through critical race theory, cancel culture, iconoclasm, and curriculum decolonization. And a really important point that is made from these authors is that Maoism believes, and Mao said, that if we don't agree with something, or if people don't agree with the line that we want to push in society, we just cancel their freedom of speech. And that's pretty much what he said. And just to leave you with a final thought for this segment from George Orwell's book, Politics in the English Language. But if the thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation, even among people who should and do know better. And later on in the news, Brian and Ben, I'm going to cover a specific example of what we can do in practice to fight back against this agenda and keep our culture and our language in place.
Diane, thank you very much for that. And we are clearly under attack, and it would appear, especially Ben and myself, due to our status as white men, but we'll see how we fare. Diane, I just say, I don't know whether it was a studio issue, but just check your microphone. You seem to go quite quiet to us. But let's move on. Well, if we've got the country controlled by people, do we know who they are? Outside agencies, pressure groups, global corporations, World Economic Forum. They are desperate to keep the war in Ukraine going. And I'm going to say that an individual challenged the Ministry of Defence a few months ago as to how many British servicemen and women had been killed or injured in Ukraine. And this resulted in a Freedom of Information request, which initially the Ministry of Defence just stalled in breach of the Freedom of Information rules. So ultimately, the Information Commissioner had to get involved. But finally, we've got an answer here. And let's have a look at how they responded. Well, very quickly, they brought in the matter of public interest. That doesn't mean in our interest, it means in their interests. And it said that the public interest arguments for and against the release of the withheld information under Section 24.1 and 26.1 are closely linked, and this is explained. So let's have a look at how they dealt with it. Well, they said that disclosing British deaths and injuries would help the Russians. They can't tell us how many British personnel have been killed or injured in Ukraine, because that would apparently help the Russians. They've said that they judge that disclosing injuries or fatalities may adversely affect security and safety of military personnel or civilians. So you're not going to know as a member of the UK public for that reason. You're also not going to know because other states and international organisations are more important to the UK government than the UK public, and we could essentially upset these people if we disclosed how many British personnel have been killed and injured. And if we go to this statement, this is the teller, because they said that 0 is a number. By withholding information, it is not indicative of a higher number. Well, of course, this is the great lie, because, of course, if there were no dead or injured British servicemen in Ukraine, the rationale for the statement would not hold true. So UK column is going to say, we are very certain that a significant number of British military personnel have been killed in Ukraine. But, of course, the UK government dare not give the figures, because this gives truth to the fact that the war is now actually between UK forces, NATO forces, and the Russians, whereas the great lie by the government is that that is not the case. So we'll leave you to think about that. Perhaps we can get more information on this subject in due course. Now, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all the viewers who are actually helping us and who have taken out a monthly membership. We can only do what we do with your help, but here we are. Thank you for the support so many people have given us. Now, with regard to adverts, I'd just like to say that this petition is still going. This is ensuring diagnosis and treatment for people suffering from adverse COVID-19 vaccine and side effects. It's at nearly 4,500 signatures, but the thing is, it ends on the 11th of December. So if we can give this a boost, it would be very good. Also like to say that we have this presentation and workshop run amongst by Sandy Adams, amongst others. But this is Friday, the 6th of December at 11 to 5, and it's at the Chiswick Memorial Club in London, W42EL. We've also got tomorrow an interview going out with Roger Meacock, the vet. He's talking about a range of subjects, including the protests, the farming protests, human slurry, and the use of PCR testing on animals, which had not been approved. And I think we've got a short video clip here.
I have this affinity to farming that sort of drove me really to go up to London on Tuesday and support the farmers and lend my voice and support to their demonstration over the inheritance tax. And the one thing that sort of I picked up on really struck me was that there doesn't seem to be much grasp at what's actually happening is deliberate ploy. They're trying to get rid of small farmers. They want large farms. They want industrial farming. They want monoculture. They want to push everybody towards plant-based eating. I think that there's more to it than is often presented. We've come across the whole rewilding idea of what they want to do to the UK. We know that they want to put wind farms and solar farms on the farmland, and instead of producing food, farmers, if they haven't got the land value, they've got nothing to borrow against when they want to buy their £500,000 worth of combine harvester.
So that will be an extremely interesting interview, and encourage people to watch that. Ben, I think brings us back to you.
Indeed, yes, for more fake democracy. And it all hinges on this organisation, Democracy Next. Another democratic future is possible, backed by open society foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, amongst many others. We've spoken about them a few times over the past year or so, and they are part of the same ecosystem as a political foundation, right? So again, I'm just going to bring this up. I've shown some clips from this Demos video a few times this year. You've got Georgia Gould, who I spoke about earlier, who's now at the Cabinet Office, right at the centre of government digitisation, sitting next to Lisa Witter, the CEO of Apolitical, who are going to be defining the future vision of the country or running a collaborative process in order to do that, probably working directly with this lady, Claudia Chalice, the chief executive of Democracy Next, who at the Demos event described these democratic innovations, new governance models that can help break through deadlocks and give legitimacy to hard decisions that require trade-offs, including around things like assisted dying. Let's hear about some of the work they've been doing in France.
In contemporary times, I would say the most common form that deliberative democracy takes are citizens' assemblies. So these are the assemblies where people are randomly selected to be broadly representative of a population, of a community, and then they are tasked with solving a really complex, pressing policy problem like climate change. I'll define it by giving the example of what took place here in France recently. There were 184 people selected by lot to be broadly representative of the diversity of French society. They were convened over the course of 27 days of deliberation spread out over 4 months.
To help out with a problem that politicians can't easily solve on their own, and that's the end of life.
To deliberate on this question of should France amend its existing legislation on end-of-life issues, and if so, in what ways?
The citizens are getting to know each other, and there's a very positive feeling between everyone.
Sur le plan personnel, la Convention citoyenne m'a apporté beaucoup d'espoir. Je suis atteint de plusieurs maladies chroniques depuis plus de 17 ans. Très jeune, je me suis posé énormément de questions sans réponse sur la fin de vie.
To be able to do that, they heard from around 60 experts, which also included stakeholders, faith group leaders, philosophers, and then they deliberated with one another to come up with 67 really detailed, concrete recommendations on which they found 92% consensus. And then these were delivered to the government.
Everybody gets a turn to speak. The conversation follows and builds towards a proposal at the end.
The defining elements of these citizens' assemblies are that people are randomly selected. So in principle, everyone has an equal chance of actually being the one in power.
They were very tentative on the first weekend, and now from the coffee breaks to the cigarette breaks behind me to the meetings in the main parliament space, they use words like we've gained respect, we've gained confidence in each other and solidarity.
Et j'ai vraiment vécu une expérience, une aventure extraordinaire.
C'est un outil magnifique que tous les gouvernements devraient utiliser régulièrement.
So, Ben, watching that, to me, that's the ultimate theatre. That's the great deception, because those people clearly felt they were doing something, but actually they were being played. And of course, who was playing them? The 60 experts that were mentioned, because those experts, the change agents, would be controlling the ordinary members of the public in steering them towards their decisions. So the citizens' assemblies, sortition, this is where we're going very, very quickly under Starmer to break down any remnant of the existing parliament-based democracy system that we've got.
Completely. It's all about ramming through a progressive agenda without proper scrutiny and giving it a veneer of respectability. And it's absolutely everywhere, right? So that was one example that we've seen from France. Democracy Next are operating across the US as well, by the way. They're active in the UK. They've got a lot of people on the ground here. This is another organisation. This popped up. This is a lady called Emma de Souza from an organisation called Civic. And this was running a citizens' assembly in Northern Ireland focusing on housing issues. So they've all agreed now that they need to borrow private money to build more homes. There's public-private partnership stuff, so again, just ushering this stuff through. Also some really interesting stuff about legislating to enforce the removal of flags and emblems from shared infrastructure in Northern Ireland. I mean, I can imagine that being quite contentious, and they've used this as a way to amend legislation. It goes right up to the global level. So ISWE, who are also in this ecosystem, are building a global citizens' assembly for climate issues. Yeah, running it directly out of the UN. Nothing terrifying about that whatsoever. There's another example here from the Sortition Foundation in Germany, which was looking at having a national conversation on nutrition and food. So another one of these hot topics relating to the climate agenda. And the Sortition Foundation, as well as Democracy Next and ISWE, very, very active in the UK. And they're promoting this agenda to replace the House of Lords with a House of Citizens, and 2025 is the year when this stuff is really going to start to ramp up.
Okay, Ben, thank you for that. Well, let's introduce the final part, really, of the system to control minds of society, children prime target. And I want to say a huge thank you to the UK column viewer who over the weekend sent me this report from the Daily Mail. Let's pop that up on screen. And now, of course, the first thing to see is the date of this article is November 2014, so 10 years ago. Sex between 13-year-olds is normal, says controversial traffic light tool sent to schools to teach about relationships. And what are we talking about here? Well, if you get into the article, it's talking about Brook, the organisation Brook, which is based in Cornwall. If we have a look at one of the little templates that they had in the article itself, if you look at what Brook is suggesting as green behaviours, solitary masturbation, sexually explicit conversations, obscenities and jokes within the current cultural norm, interest in erotica, pornography, use of intermediate media to chat online, having sexual or non-sexual relationships, and on it goes. Now, what was interesting was that when I went to have a look at Brook, I came across the leadership team, always of interest, Helen Marshall, the chief executive, but the next name that came up was one of the trustees, Dame Sally Dickett's, and I recognised this lady immediately as the former head of Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, because way back in 2011, the UK column exposed child abuse at this very college. If you go onto the UK column website, we've got a number of articles about what was going on, utterly disgraceful. We were actually threatened by the college with legal action for reporting, but of course we were telling the truth and nothing took place. But what was going on, alcohol consumed in classrooms, bullying, racism, health and safety breaches, pornographic videos, sexual and physical assaults, abuse of trust and neglect, and they were just some of the accusations against the college itself. But of course the principal of the college promoted and rewarded via the system, the award system, and ultimately has moved on to Brooke. So I'm not sure that I've got much confidence there for what Brooke is actually doing with our children, and encourage people to dig in deeper to see for themselves. Diane, let's bring you back on screen, because we're going to end today's news with, I think, a little bit of a positive angle about people who are actually stepping forward to challenge what we see unfolding around us. Can we hear you?
Can't hear anything.
Diane, I think unfortunately, I think we've lost your sound at the moment, or are you muted?
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, sorry.
I'm afraid no, it happens. You'll have to start that segment again, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. You've reassured me. I didn't know whether my hearing had taken a dive, but apparently it's okay. So just do that again.
Okay, thank you. So over the weekend, I went to something that I consider to be a positive solution, because at UK Column, we get a lot of questions about what can we actually do, because we hear these horrible things happening, and what can we do to make a difference and start to change things. So, for example, over the weekend, I went to a group called the St. Andrew's Day Celebration with Common Knowledge Edinburgh, which is a group that I'm a member of up here. And we believe in what we call spreading marginalized ideas and applying reason to the subjects that are of greatest concern, spreading what should be common knowledge: love, courage, integrity, and community. And the point of the celebration was not only just to have fun and eat some good food and have some whiskey, but also because we wanted to basically practice the national culture that the globalists are trying so hard to eradicate. So I've got a few clips here that I took on Saturday night, and we've added some sort of Scottish soundscape music because there was a lot of background noise and people talking. So hopefully, if you can't hear everything, you can watch it later with subtitles. But I've just got 3 videos here. The first one is a poet called Glenn Telfer, and he told the story through his poems of the story of St. Andrew, who was the patron saint of Scotland. And here's the first one of his poems that he read. Hopefully you can hear just a bit.
At Glencullen Kill, this poem is called, it's from Scotland's saint, and it's a sight to make a stone weep, and may yet. Faded pictures, christening cups, bangles and ribbons, wind-lashed teddy, a wee red toy car, children's playthings spoilt and scattered by a clumsy hand. Memories of a heartache that filled the frame to bursting and was only salved by being battered into unconsciousness by the drink or by madness. But although fading to earthly nothings in the relentless Atlantic weather, these pathetic tokens of a sad and oh so little mortal life are mere ciphers for a power that dwarfs the vastness of the pain and bathes that crucifying world in a warm golden light. We are not forgotten and never will be, even when the carriers of the burden let it go for the last time. And this is why they are here, for Columba to hold them safe in his arms forever, a guarantee from ancient days that means what it says. Take my hand and trust me, we have friends along the road who want to meet you.
We have friends along the road who want to meet you. Don't we all want that? The next video is from someone called Paddy Hogg, who is a former local councillor and a Burns adherent, as he calls himself. He was very inspirational.
But if the ideas get into the culture and they stay there, the practice, that's true. The relics of St. Andrew, the first apostle of Christ, are said to have been brought to Scotland and kept in Fife, and that is the origin of the town's name, St. Andrew. Simple as that. True or not, how do we verify it? End of time. When people believe something to be true, it's true for them. If kids see a ghost,
And my third video here is a reading from a book called The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, which was written by Tobias Smollett, who was born in West Dunbartonshire, Scotland, or what is now West Dunbartonshire. It was published in 1771, just a few days before his death, actually. And it's a picaresque novel about a character called Matthew Bramble and his family traveling through England and Scotland. And there's just a tale of their travels as they went around the country. And the point was to make Matthew recover from illness. So here's a description of some golfers that they supposedly saw in this fictional work at Leaf Links up here in Edinburgh.
One particular set of golfers, the youngest of whom was turned of 80. They were all gentlemen of independent fortunes who had amused themselves with this pastime for the best part of a century, without having ever felt the least alarm from sickness or disgust. And they never went to bed without having each the best part of a gallon of claret in his belly. Such uninterrupted exercise, cooperating with the keen air from the sea, must without all doubt keep the appetite always on edge and steel the constitution against all the common attacks of distemper.
So that was the duo of Matthew Wilson and Martin Watt. Martin Watt is a UK column viewer, and I had a good conversation with him on Saturday night. We had live music, which of course I can't play, unfortunately, due to copyright restriction. This is from Aria Music. So that's Kirsty from Aria Music, and she did some amazing renditions of both Highland Cathedral, Caledonia, so traditional Scottish music, as well as some of her original folk music. And we also did have Gay Gordon's Kaylee, which I did not get up for, by the way. And also I met there a man called Mark Wilkinson, and because we do like to highlight relatively independent approaches to politics, this is a man who's organized a group called Edinburgh People, which he's calling a new political party, but they're essentially independents. They did have some candidates running for MP in the general election earlier this year. And so just some key points from his policies, which I personally agree with: reversing and stopping low traffic neighborhoods, since I certainly live in what I would call a 15-minute city in my area of Edinburgh. I'm happy to see this happen. The belief that people don't want war, it's only those who profit from war who want war. Freedom of medical autonomy, which refers to things like COVID vaccinations, and women's safe spaces to be kept safe, which means excluding men, cis men or otherwise, from our spaces. Coming up next, just for a couple of events, if you are interested in coming up to Edinburgh, or if you are here in Scotland already, we are hosting Sonia Poulton on the 14th of December in combination with a Christmas party. So we're delighted to be looking forward to that. On the 9th of January, we will have Annie Barr, who is an alternative healthcare provider, and she provides solutions tailored to the individual. Her website is abhealthhub.com, and she is treating a lot of people currently who are vaccine injured. And I will be speaking at a full-day event in February, sponsored by Commonwealth Edinburgh, and more details of that will be to come soon once that is all finalized.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Diane. I'm going to say we have to end the news there. We're always short of time because there's always so much to talk about. But the key thing is do have a look at the news again when it's online with all the show notes, because that is what you can share with other people, not only to help wake them up to what's really happening, but of course there's also information, comment and video clips that you can post on the channels of the very people who are taking over our society. But good to see some nice positive things there happening north of the border, Diane. So well done for reporting on that. Lastly, I'm just going to say, it was very sad for us to hear about the death of Anna de Busseret, the lawyer who's done so much good work. I know that her background was concentrated towards media, and also she'd been a territorial army officer for, I think it was 9 years. So many people are going to sadly miss her, and we were very saddened to hear about her death. We must end the news now, but we'll be back in a few minutes' time with UK Column Extra. We've got a ton of things to talk about, so join us then. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.